I'm Leah, 42 years old, and I once believed I had built an unbreakable marriage. For 20 years I stood by James through everything, only to hear him demand a divorce. Like our 2 decades meant nothing. What he didn't know was that his father, who had become more like my own, had been watching everything. Before I tell you how my father-in-law's will changed everything, let me know where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe to hear more stories about loyalty that stands the test of time. I grew up in a small town in Illinois where everyone knew each other's business. My parents were hard-working people who instilled in me the values of honesty and perseverance. I always had big dreams that seemed to stretch beyond our town limits. When I received a partial scholarship to Northwestern University, it felt like the universe was opening a door to possibilities I'd only imagined. That's where I met James during my sophomore year. He was a business major with a confidence that both intimidated and attracted me. We met at the university coffee shop where I worked part-time to supplement my scholarship. Unlike the other wealthy students who barely acknowledged the staff, James looked me in the eyes when he ordered and always left a generous tip. One rainy afternoon in October, the shop was nearly empty, and James asked if he could interview me for a sociology project. What started as a formal interview quickly evolved into a 3-hour conversation about our dreams, fears, and everything in between. By the time we realized how long we'd been talking, the shop had closed, and the manager was giving us pointed looks. I think I just lost track of 3 hours. I laughed, gathering my books. I think I just found someone special, he replied with a sincerity that made my heart skip. Our romance progressed quickly after that. James was unlike anyone I'd dated before. He came from wealth and privilege, but there was an earnestness to him that seemed unspoiled by his upbringing. Within 6 months, we were inseparable, spending holidays together and making plans for the future. When James first took me to meet his family, I understood why he had been hesitant. Their home was not just a house, but an estate complete with manicured gardens and staff. His mother Elizabeth greeted me with a practiced smile that never reached her eyes. His father Richard was more direct in his assessment. "So you're the girl who's distracting my son from his studies," he said, eyeing my department store dress. "Actually, sir," I replied, maintaining eye contact. "I've been helping James prepare for his economics final. I'm carrying a double major in business and education." Something flickered in Richard's eyes, then perhaps surprise or a grudging respect. It was the beginning of what would become one of the most important relationships in my life, though I couldn't have known it then. Despite his family's subtle and not so subtle disapproval, James proposed to me during our senior year. The ring was modest by his family's standards, which he apologized for, but I loved that he had chosen it himself rather than using a family heirloom. "I want us to build our own legacy," he explained. We married in a simple ceremony shortly after graduation. James's parents attended but didn't offer to host or contribute, making their disapproval clear. Rather than the lavish reception they expected for their only son, we celebrated at a local restaurant with our closest friends and my family. After the wedding, James took a junior position at his father's company. We rented a small apartment, wanting to establish ourselves independently despite his family's wealth. Those early years were some of our happiest, though not without challenges. We lived frugally while James worked long hours, and I supported him through business school. It was during this time that Richard began to see me differently. When James would come home exhausted and frustrated by the pressure at work, I encouraged him to persevere to learn the business from the ground up, rather than expecting special treatment as the boss's son. At a company dinner about 2 years into our marriage, Richard pulled me aside. "You know, Leah, I misjudged you," he admitted, swirling his scotch. "James has changed since meeting you. He's more focused, more disciplined. I thought you'd be a distraction, but you've been quite the opposite." "I believe in him," I said simply, "and I believe in earning your place, not just being given it." Richard nodded thoughtfully, a philosophy I share. Perhaps we have more in common than I realized. From that moment, Richard began including me in conversations about the business. He seemed genuinely interested in my perspective and background in business. Meanwhile, James was thriving at work, gradually earning the respect of employees who had initially seen him only as the boss's son. We had decided to delay having children, focusing instead on our careers and financial stability. It was a decision that made sense at the time, though I would later wonder if different choices might have led us down another path. By our 5th anniversary, things had changed significantly. We had moved to a larger apartment, and James had been promoted twice. At our anniversary dinner, which Richard and Elizabeth unexpectedly hosted at their home, Richard raised a toast that moved me to tears. When James brought Leah home, I saw only what I thought he was losing. Now I see clearly what he has gained. To Leah, who has not only supported my son, but has made him a better man, and I suspect will make our company a better one as well. Elizabeth's smile remained fixed, but Richard's words felt like a turning point. I was no longer just the girl from the wrong side of the tracks, who had somehow snagged the heir to the Anderson fortune. I was becoming a valued member of the family in my own right. Looking back at those early years, there were no signs of the betrayal that would eventually shatter our world. We were young in love and building what I thought was an unshakable foundation for our future. If only I had known how quickly solid ground can shift beneath your feet when you least expect it. As we approached our 10th anniversary, subtle changes had begun to reshape our marriage. James had been made vice president of acquisitions at his father's company, a position that came with increased responsibility and frequent travel. Our spacious downtown condo often felt empty as his business trips extended from days to weeks. When he was home, James brought with him a new energy, but also a new distance. The ambitious but grounded man I'd married was evolving into someone more concerned with status symbols and business connections. Our conversations, once filled with dreams and inside jokes, became dominated by business deals and networking opportunities. "You should have seen their faces when I closed the Henderson deal," James would say, loosening his tie after a long day. "Dad never thought we could acquire them, but I made it happen. That's wonderful," I'd respond, trying to connect. "How did you manage to convince them?" But rather than sharing the journey with me, as he once would have, James would wave his hand dismissively. "Just business strategy, Leah. You wouldn't find it interesting." Each time he shut me out this way, a small fracture appeared in our relationship. I tried various approaches to bridge the growing gap. I joined a gym to be more active, like him read business journals to better understand his world, and planned weekend getaways to recapture our earlier intimacy. Nothing seemed to fully reach him. On his 35th birthday, I organised a surprise party with close friends and colleagues. When the moment came to toast him, I spoke from my heart about his determination and success. Later that night, as guests departed, I found James in his study already checking emails. "Did you enjoy your party?" I asked, resting my hands on his tense shoulders. "It was fine," he replied without looking up. "Though next time maybe not so many people from outside the industry." Half the room couldn't appreciate the Henderson acquisition announcement. I dropped my hands, the rejection stinging. I thought it would be nice to celebrate with friends, not just business associates. "We're at a different level now, Leah. The people we surround ourselves with matter." I didn't recognize this man who measured friendships by professional utility. What happened to the James who once stayed up all night helping our neighbour move when their lease was unexpectedly terminated? Richard noticed the changes in his son as well. During a family foundation meeting, he observed James dismissing a long-time employee's suggestion without consideration. After the meeting, Richard invited me to lunch, something that had become a monthly tradition between us. "James reminds me of myself at his age." Richard confessed, his weathered face serious. "Too focused on the conquest, not enough on the consequences. He's just passionate about growing the company." I defended loyal, despite my own concerns. Richard studied me carefully. There's a difference between growth and greed, Leah. I learned that lesson the hard way, when it almost cost me my family. I'm concerned James is heading down a similar path. What changed for you? I asked, genuinely curious. Perspective, realizing that all the wealth in the world means nothing if you compromise your integrity to get it. He sighed heavily. I've been watching some of James's acquisition strategies. They're effective, but sometimes ethically questionable. This conversation troubled me deeply. I had noticed James becoming more cutthroat in business, but I'd attributed it to the competitive industry. Hearing his father's concerns validated my unease. For our 15th anniversary, James surprised me with a trip to Italy. Initially, I was thrilled, believing it signaled a recommitment to our relationship. That hope faded when I discovered he had scheduled meetings throughout our vacation and invited business partners to most of our dinners. This is supposed to be our anniversary trip. I confronted him one night in our hotel room after yet another business dinner. And it is, he replied, loosening his tie. But why not mix business with pleasure? These connections will set us up for the next phase of our life. What next phase? We barely connect in our current phase. James looked at me with genuine confusion. We have everything we've ever wanted, Leah. The penthouse, the vacation property, the right social circle. What more could you want? In that moment, I realized we had fundamentally different views of success. For me, our relationship had always been the foundation of everything else. For James, it had become merely one asset in his portfolio of achievements. Upon our return, Richard invited me to join the family foundation board, independent of James, who had been showing less interest in their philanthropic work. You have the heart for this work that the foundation needs, Richard explained. James is focused elsewhere these days. I accepted finding purpose in work that aligned with my values. The foundation became a refuge from my increasingly hollow marriage. While James attended networking events and business dinners, I developed programs supporting education access for underprivileged students. At home, I became almost invisible. James and I operated as roommates, sharing expensive real estate more than partners sharing a life. I maintained appearances at company functions, played the supportive wife role, but privately wondered how much longer our marriage could continue in this state of emotional disconnection. The girl from the small town who once believed in the power of love and commitment was learning a harsh lesson about how success can change people and how easily principles can be compromised in the pursuit of more. Yet, I still clung to hope that the man I married was somewhere beneath the ambitious executive who now wore his face. The first concrete evidence of James's betrayal came on an ordinary Tuesday. He had left his phone on the kitchen counter while showering, something he rarely did. When a text notification illuminated the screen, I glanced over instinctively. Miss you already, dinner was perfect. Same time Thursday s. My heart seemed to stop mid-beat. James had told me he had a late meeting with clients on Thursday. A reasonable explanation could exist, I told myself, even as my hand trembled in reaching for the phone. I hesitated. Respecting his privacy had always been important to me, but the gnawing suspicion proved stronger. I entered his passcode, which he'd never bothered to change from our anniversary date. The text history with S revealed months of intimate exchanges, dinner plans, hotel arrangements, inside jokes. The last message had been sent just hours after he'd called to say he was working late. When James emerged from the shower, I was sitting at the kitchen island, his phone beside me. Who's S? I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. His expression shifted from confusion to anger so quickly it confirmed my suspicions before he spoke. You went through my phone. What happened to trust? Trust works both ways, I replied. Who is she, James? After a moment of tense silence, he sighed dramatically. It's Stephanie, my new executive assistant. We've been working closely on the Westlake project. Those texts are nothing, just friendly banter. You told me you were with clients last night. I was. Stephanie joined us to take notes. His explanation came too smoothly. You're overreacting to a professional relationship. The gaslighting continued as he turned the situation around, making me feel irrational for questioning him. I wanted to believe him so badly that I allowed doubt to creep in. Maybe I was jumping to conclusions. In the weeks that followed, I tried to dismiss my suspicions, but new patterns emerged. James changed his phone passcode. Credit card statements showed charges at jewelry stores for items I never received. He began taking calls in another room, his voice dropping to a whisper. At a company event, I met Stephanie for the first time, a polished woman in her late 20s with obvious ambition. When I approached them talking in a corner, their conversation halted abruptly. "Leah, have you met Stephanie?" James asked with forced casualness. "She's been an absolute lifesaver with the Westlake acquisition." "James speaks so highly of you," Stephanie said, extending her hand. Her smile didn't reach her eyes, which evaluated me with cool assessment. More telling was James's business partner Michael's behavior. He could barely meet my gaze. When we spoke, his discomfort palpable. Michael had been James's friend since college and had been in our wedding party. His awkwardness around me spoke volumes. After 2 months of mounting evidence and sleepless nights, I made a decision that went against everything I believed about trust in marriage. I hired a private investigator. "I need to know for certain," I explained to the investigator, a former police officer named Diana. "I can't confront him again without proof." 2 weeks later, Diana delivered a manila envelope containing photos of James and Stephanie entering and leaving a boutique hotel on afternoons when he claimed to be in meetings. There were lunch dates with intimate gestures, a weekend trip when he'd said he was at a conference in Denver. The final photo showed them kissing in his car in the underground parking garage of his office building. The timestamp was from the previous day when he'd called to say he was working late. That night, I placed the photos on the dining table. When James came home, I asked him to sit down. "I know about Stephanie," I said, sliding the photos toward him. "I know it's been going on for months." The denial I expected never came. Instead, his shoulders slumped slightly before he regained his composure. "I didn't want you to find out this way," he said, not meeting my eyes. "It just happened, Leah. We've been working closely, and things evolved." "Things don't just evolve, James. You made choices. Every dinner, every hotel room, every lie was a choice." "I'm sorry," he offered, though his tone lacked genuine remorse. "It was a mistake. It won't happen again." "How long?" I asked, needing to understand the extent of the betrayal. "A few months," he replied too quickly. "The hotel receipt in the photos is from 6 months ago," I pointed out. He sighed, irritated at being caught in another lie. "Fine, about 6 months, but it's over now, I promise. I'll end it immediately." Despite the devastation, I felt some part of me still loved the man I thought he was. We had nearly 17 years of history between us. Walking away felt impossible. "I want to try counselling," I said finally, "if you're serious about our marriage." James agreed, seemingly relieved I wasn't asking for a divorce. We began seeing a therapist weekly, though James frequently rescheduled due to urgent work matters. When he did attend, his participation was superficial, offering practiced answers that satisfied the therapist, but avoided real vulnerability. During this tumultuous period, Richard's health began to decline. What started as persistent fatigue was diagnosed as stage 3 pancreatic cancer. James appeared appropriately concerned in public, but remained emotionally detached from his father's illness. "He's always been strong," James commented after a doctor's appointment. "He'll pull through this like everything else." His dismissive attitude toward both our marriage counselling and his father's illness revealed a disturbing pattern. James had become a man who dealt with emotional challenges by minimizing them and focusing on business instead. As our marriage hung by a thread and my trust lay shattered, I couldn't have imagined how these betrayals were just the beginning of a much larger deception, or how Richard's illness would eventually bring everything to light. After the discovery of James's affair, we entered a period I can only describe as a false dawn. On the surface, things appeared to improve. James made a show of recommitting to our marriage. He sent flowers to my office scheduled date nights and seemed more attentive to my feelings. "I've been taking our situation seriously," he told me over dinner at my favorite restaurant. "I realized how close I came to losing you." I wanted to believe him. The alternative was acknowledging that our entire life together might have been built on a foundation that was crumbling beneath us. The counselor had warned me that rebuilding trust would take time, and I tried to give James the space to prove himself. For our 18th anniversary, James organised a private vow renewal ceremony with a handful of close friends as witnesses. We promised again to love and honour each other. As I repeated words I had first spoken nearly 2 decades earlier, I felt a cautious hope rekindling. "I almost lost sight of what matters most," James said during his vows, his eyes meeting mine with what seemed like genuine emotion. "I won't make that mistake again." In the months that followed, I began to believe we had weathered the storm. Our communication improved, and James made efforts to include me in his world again. We even began discussing the possibility of finally starting a family, something we had continuously postponed for various reasons over the years. Then Richard's health took a dramatic turn. What we had believed was responding to treatment suddenly accelerated. The doctors revised his prognosis from years to months. James's reaction surprised me. While I had expected him to be devastated, he instead became oddly detached, focusing on practical matters like power of attorney and business continuity. "Someone needs to keep a clear head," he explained when I questioned his emotional distance. "Dad would expect me to ensure the company remains stable." As James buried himself in work, I found myself stepping in to coordinate Richard's care. I arranged for home health care, drove him to treatments, and spent hours by his bedside when the pain medications made him too weak to be alone. During those quiet afternoons, Richard and I developed a deeper connection. Free from corporate pretense and social obligations, we talked about life regrets and hopes for the future. "You know Leah," he said one afternoon, his once robust frame now fragile against the hospital pillows. "You remind me of myself when I was younger, before money and status became too important." "I thought you were born into wealth," I said, surprised. Richard laughed weakly. "Hardly. I built everything from scratch. Started with a small machine shop loan. Elizabeth's family had the social connections that helped us initially, but somewhere along the way, I lost perspective on what really mattered." He reached for my hand, his grip still surprisingly strong. "Promise me you won't make the same mistakes. Money is just a tool, not a purpose." These conversations continued through his treatment with Richard, increasingly sharing business insights and family history. He seemed concerned about the company's future, asking pointed questions about James's handling of certain accounts. "Has James mentioned the Westlake acquisition to you?" he asked one day. "Only that it's been taking much of his time," I answered carefully. Richard's expression darkened. "I've been reviewing some of the paperwork. The terms are concerning." Before he could elaborate, James arrived unexpectedly. The tension between father and son was palpable as James quickly changed the subject to treatment options. Later, when I asked James about the Westlake deal, he dismissed my questions. "Dad's medication is making him confused," he said firmly. "The deal is solid." It was during this period that I discovered James had never ended his affair with Stephanie. While organising Richard's medication schedule on James's laptop, a message notification appeared from her. "Missing you. When can you get away this weekend?" The message history revealed their relationship had continued uninterrupted, despite James's promises and our vow renewal. What hurt most wasn't just the ongoing infidelity, but the elaborate performance he had staged to convince me otherwise. I closed the laptop without responding to Stephanie. My focus needed to remain on Richard, whose condition had temporarily stabilised with a new treatment protocol. Confronting James would have to wait. Unknown to me, then Richard had been making his own discoveries. During a lucid period when his pain was well managed, he had asked his long-time assistant to bring specific company files to review. What he found apparently troubled him deeply, though he shared little with me at the time. "I need to make some changes," he told me cryptically one afternoon, "to protect what I've built." Over the next several weeks, Richard had multiple private meetings with his attorney. James was notably excluded, which caused obvious tension when he discovered them. "What's this about secret meetings with Hamilton?" James demanded one evening when visiting his father. "Estate planning," Richard replied calmly. "Nothing for you to worry about until the time comes." "As CFO and your successor, I should be involved in any decisions affecting the company," James insisted. Richard's gaze was steady. "When the time comes, everything will be clear." The exchange left James visibly unsettled, but he didn't press further in my presence. As Richard's health temporarily improved with the new treatment, he insisted I continue my involvement with the family foundation, and even requested I attend several board meetings in his place. This further aggravated James, who had expected to assume these responsibilities. "Dad's not thinking clearly," James complained after one such meeting. "Having you step in for board matters sends the wrong message to the executive team." "I'm just helping where Richard asks me to," I replied, increasingly troubled by James's focus on appearances rather than his father's wishes. The tension between James and Richard grew as Richard continued making mysterious changes to both his personal affairs and business arrangements. Meanwhile, the facade of our reconciled marriage grew thinner by the day. I was caught between loyalty to Richard, who had become more family to me than my husband, and the increasingly hollow promise of saving my marriage. Little did I know that both would come to a breaking point far sooner than I expected. Our 20th anniversary arrived on a crisp autumn evening. 2 decades of marriage felt like both an eternity and the blink of an eye. Despite everything, I had arranged a special dinner at the restaurant where we had celebrated our first anniversary, hoping the significance of the milestone might rekindle something genuine between us. James arrived 30 minutes late, offering a cursory apology about a meeting that ran long. He looked immaculate in his tailored suit, but distracted, checking his phone repeatedly throughout the appetizer course. 20 years, I said, raising my glass. Through everything we've made it this far. James clinked his glass against mine without enthusiasm. Yes, quite a long time. His cold demeanour persisted throughout the dinner. When the dessert arrived with "Happy 20th Anniversary" written in chocolate around the plate, he barely acknowledged it. "James, is something wrong?" I finally asked, unable to bear the tension any longer. He set down his fork and looked directly at me, for perhaps the first time that evening. "This isn't working, Leah," he said with clinical detachment. "I've been considering our situation, and I think it's time we end this marriage." The words struck me physically, as if he had slapped me across the face. "You want a divorce on our anniversary? The timing is unfortunate," he conceded, checking his watch. "But there's never a good time for these conversations." "What brought this on now?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "We've been growing apart for years," he replied with practiced ease. "You must have felt it too. We want different things, and I've been seeing Stephanie. It's serious." The casual way he admitted to the ongoing affair after months of deception felt like a second blow. "Serious?" I repeated, my voice hollow. "While you were renewing our vows and talking about starting a family, I tried to make it work with you, Leah. I really did. But Stephanie understands me, understands the business world. We connect on a different level." 20 years, I whispered, tears threatening. 20 years, and this is how you end it for your assistant. His expression hardened. "We've wasted enough time pretending. Stephanie's pregnant." The revelation stunned me into silence. After years of postponing a family because James claimed he wasn't ready, he had apparently been ready, just not with me. "I've already spoken with my attorney," he continued, sliding an envelope across the table. These are the initial separation papers. I'll be generous with the settlement if you don't drag this out. I stared at the envelope, unable to process that my husband had brought divorce papers to our anniversary dinner. You planned this tonight. I thought it would be best to have a clear ending point, he replied, as if discussing a business deal rather than dismantling 2 decades of marriage. 20 years seems like an appropriate time to move on. To move on, I echoed, the numbness giving way to anger, like our marriage was some job you've outgrown. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be, Leah. We had some good years, but it's over. I need you to move out of the penthouse by the end of the month. Stephanie will be moving in. The casual cruelty of his timeline shocked me back to reality. You expect me to leave our home in 2 weeks? The penthouse is in my name, he said dismissively. I've arranged for a furnished apartment for you until the settlement is finalized. How considerate, I replied, my voice finding its strength through the hurt. And what does your father think about all this? Something flashed in James's eyes then, a momentary uncertainty. Dad doesn't need to be troubled with our personal matters given his health. He'll understand this is for the best. Will he? I challenged, because the man I've come to know values loyalty and commitment above all else. My father respects success and decisive action. James countered, his confidence returning. And with his health failing, I'll soon be controlling the company anyway. It's better that we clarify our situation now. In that moment, I saw James clearly for perhaps the first time. The ambitious boy I'd fallen in love with had become a man who viewed relationships as transactions, people as assets or liabilities. Even his dying father was just another stepping stone to greater control and power. I won't contest the divorce, I said quietly, gathering my purse, but I won't be pushed out of my home in 2 weeks, like some inconvenience. And Richard deserves to hear about this from me, not through company gossip. Always the moral high ground, James sneered. That won't serve you well in the divorce. Remember, I control the finances. My name is on everything. Be reasonable and you'll walk away comfortably. Fight me and you'll leave with nothing. I stood dignity intact, despite the shattering of my world. You've made your choice, James. I hope it brings you what you're looking for. As I walked out of the restaurant, leaving my husband of 20 years, with the anniversary dessert melting untouched between us, I had no idea that his threats about controlling everything would soon prove to be his greatest miscalculation. Later that night, as I sat alone in the penthouse that would soon no longer be my home, I discovered James had been planning this moment for over a year. Hidden in his home office files was a separate bank account established 18 months earlier, the gradual transfer of assets into his name alone and property viewings for bachelor accommodations before pivoting to keeping the penthouse. He had orchestrated the end of our marriage with the same strategic precision he applied to hostile business takeovers. And like those takeovers, he had calculated every advantage to ensure he emerged with everything of value. What James couldn't have calculated was the depth of the relationship I had formed with his father, or how Richard's final act would upend everything James thought he controlled. Richard passed away peacefully 3 weeks after my devastating anniversary dinner. Despite his deteriorating condition, I had kept my promise to tell him about James's decision to end our marriage. The pain in his eyes when I shared the news wasn't just for me, but seemed to reflect a deeper disappointment in his son. I had hoped he would grow into a better man, Richard had said, his voice barely audible. I'm sorry, Leah. You deserved more loyalty than this. The funeral was held at the same church where James and I had married 2 decades earlier. I sat in the front row beside Elizabeth, who maintained her public composure despite her private grief. James stood at the pulpit, delivering a eulogy that painted Richard as a business visionary and devoted father words that rang hollow given recent events. Stephanie sat several rows back, her presence at the funeral, an uncomfortable statement about her new position in James's life. Her slight baby bump was just becoming visible beneath her black dress, a sight that still sent pain through my chest, despite my best efforts to remain dignified. After the service, James's attorney, Hamilton, approached me discreetly. "Mrs. Anderson, there will be a reading of Richard's will tomorrow at my office. Your presence is requested." James overheard and interjected smoothly. "I'm sure Leah has other matters to attend to, Hamilton. As next of kin and CEO, I can handle any formalities." Hamilton's expression remained professional but firm. "Actually, Mr. Anderson, your father was explicit that Mrs. Anderson must be present. 2 o'clock tomorrow." With a respectful nod to me, he moved away to speak with other attendees. James's jaw tightened momentarily before he composed himself. "A formality," he assured me coldly. "Don't expect anything to change our arrangement." The next day, I arrived at Hamilton's office to find a small gathering already assembled. James sat confidently at the conference table with Stephanie beside him, her hand protectively on her stomach. Elizabeth was seated opposite them, her expression unreadable. Several board members from the company were also present, which seemed unusual for a family will reading. Hamilton entered precisely at 2 o'clock, carrying a leather portfolio. "Thank you all for coming. Before we begin, I must note that Richard made significant changes to his will approximately 2 months ago after extensive review of both his personal and business affairs." James shifted in his seat, a flicker of concern crossing his face. "What kind of changes? All will become clear as we proceed," Hamilton replied, opening the portfolio. He began with standard legal language, then moved to specific bequests. Elizabeth received their home and personal possessions, along with a generous lifetime allowance. Then Hamilton cleared his throat. "Regarding Anderson Industries and associated holdings, Richard has made the following determinations." James leaned forward slightly, his expression confident. As the only child and current CFO, he clearly expected to inherit controlling interest in the company his father had built. "To my son James Anderson," Hamilton read, "I leave a trust fund in the amount of $5 million to be distributed in annual payments of $250,000 over 20 years contingent upon his continued sobriety and annual medical verification that he is free from narcotic substances." The room fell silent. James's face flushed with anger and confusion. "That's absurd. I don't have substance abuse issues." There must be some mistake. Hamilton continued without acknowledging the outburst. "The trust is further contingent upon James's resignation from Anderson Industries, effective immediately." "This is outrageous." James stood abruptly. "My father would never cut me out of the company. I demand to see those documents." "Please control yourself, Mr. Anderson," Hamilton said firmly. "There is more." James remained standing, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the conference table. "Regarding the controlling interest in Anderson Industries, representing 60% of all shares," Hamilton continued, "I leave this in its entirety to Leah Anderson, who has demonstrated the business acumen, ethical judgment, and loyalty that should be the foundation of the company's future." The words seemed to hang in the air as everyone processed their meaning. I sat frozen, unable to comprehend what I had just heard. James's face transformed from anger to shock to a sickly pallor. "That's impossible," he whispered. "She can't run the company. She's not even family anymore." Hamilton removed a sealed envelope from the portfolio. Richard included a personal letter to be read at this time. He broke the seal and began reading Richard's familiar handwriting. "My decision may come as a shock to some of you, particularly my son. While I have always loved James, I cannot ignore the direction he has taken both personally and professionally. His recent business decisions have violated the ethical standards upon which I built this company, and his treatment of his marriage reflects a character I cannot entrust with my life's work. Leah came into our family as an outsider, but has demonstrated the values I hold dear. During my illness, she showed me unwavering loyalty while simultaneously developing the business acumen to lead. Where James saw shortcuts and opportunities for personal gain, Leah consistently prioritized long-term stability and ethical considerations. She is the leader Anderson Industries needs." James's face had turned from pale to mottled red. This is manipulation. He wasn't of sound mind when he made these changes. I'll contest this immediately. Hamilton calmly removed another document from his portfolio. Richard anticipated your reaction, James. This is a detailed report compiled by a private investigator documenting your involvement in the fraudulent valuation of the Westlake acquisition, unauthorized appropriation of company funds for personal use, and evidence of cocaine use during multiple business trips. James stared at the document, the blood draining from his face. Should you choose to contest the will, Hamilton continued, this information would necessarily become part of the court record. Stephanie, who had remained silent until now, abruptly stood. James, we need to speak privately. Her expression had transformed from supportive to calculating in seconds. Elizabeth, who had watched the proceedings with increasing distress, finally spoke. James, what have you done? I sat in stunned silence, trying to process the magnitude of what had just happened. Richard had not only protected me from James's threats to leave me with nothing, he had entrusted me with everything he valued most. Additionally, Hamilton added, looking directly at me, Richard left instructions regarding the penthouse apartment, which is owned by the company. Leah is to retain residence there for as long as she wishes. James must vacate the property within 30 days. James looked as if he might physically collapse. Everything he had assumed was his birthright had been stripped away in minutes. His father, whom he had underestimated until the end, had seen through his facade and made the ultimate judgment on his character. As the meeting concluded, I remained seated, overwhelmed by both gratitude for Richard's faith in me and the enormous responsibility he had placed on my shoulders. When I finally looked up, the room had emptied except for Hamilton. He believed in you completely, Leah, the attorney said quietly. In our final meetings, he said you were the daughter he wished he'd had. Those words broke the dam of emotion I had been holding back. Tears flowed freely as I realized that while I had lost a husband, I had been claimed by a father who saw my true worth when his own son could not. In the weeks following Richard's will reading, I moved through a strange new reality. The woman who had once worked part-time at a college coffee shop to supplement her scholarship now controlled a multinational corporation worth billions. The irony that this happened just as my 20-year marriage ended wasn't lost on me. My first days at the company were overwhelming. Though Richard had been subtly preparing me through our foundation work and conversations during his illness, actually stepping into his role felt like trying to navigate a ship through a storm with only basic sailing knowledge. I'm not sure I can do this, I confessed to Hamilton during a private meeting. Maybe I should just sell my shares and start fresh somewhere else. The attorney regarded me thoughtfully. That's precisely what James is hoping you'll do. Several potential buyers have already approached him as an intermediary. Of course they have, I sighed, unsurprised by James's attempts to regain control. Richard believed you were equal to this challenge, Hamilton reminded me. He wouldn't have placed such faith in you without reason. Those words became my mantra in the difficult early days. When faced with decisions that seemed beyond my experience, I asked myself what Richard would do, not just in terms of business acumen, but ethical foundation. The transition wasn't without resistance. Several executives who had been loyal to James initially questioned my authority. Others adopted a wait-and-see approach, their cooperation tentative at best. My first major discovery was the extent of James's financial mismanagement. Under the guise of aggressive growth, he had leveraged the company in increasingly risky ventures, some bordering on fraudulent. The Westlake acquisition, that had consumed so much of his time with Stephanie, had been built on deliberately inflated valuations that could have eventually triggered regulatory investigations. He was positioning himself to sell high before the inevitable crash, explained Marcus, the company controller, who had privately voiced concerns to Richard before his death. If the timing had worked out differently, he could have walked away with millions while the company imploded. With Marcus's help, I began the painstaking process of unwinding the riskiest deals and establishing more transparent financial practices. Each corrective action revealed new layers of James's deception, not just to me as his wife, but to the company his father had entrusted him with. During this period, James made several attempts to reinsert himself into my life. His initial rage gave way to calculated charm as he realized his financial future was precarious. "We should discuss reconciliation," he suggested during an unexpected visit to my office, "for the good of the company. The divorce papers you served me say otherwise," I reminded him, keeping my voice steady despite the anger that still simmered beneath the surface. "As does Stephanie's pregnancy. People make mistakes," he said with practiced contrition. "I've had time to reflect on what I've lost. We built something special, Leah. We could again with the resources we now have." The transparency of his manipulation was almost insulting. "You mean the resources I now control?" I corrected him. "The same resources you threatened to deny me entirely." "That was before I understood what my father had done," he argued. "We were good together once. We could be again." I studied the man I had loved for half my life, trying to see any remnant of the person I had married. All I found was a calculating stranger who viewed me as an obstacle to overcome. "The divorce will proceed as filed," I said firmly. "The company attorneys have been instructed to expedite my name change back to Leah Carter. Your temporary housing allowance will continue until the divorce is final, as specified in your father's will." "You can't just erase 20 years," he protested, his friendly facade slipping. "I'm not the one who tried to do that," I reminded him. "You made your choices, James. Now we both live with them." His desperation became more evident after Stephanie left him upon learning that his financial prospects had dramatically changed. The pregnancy that had been leveraged to accelerate our divorce became a bargaining chip in their separation as well. As my confidence in my new role grew, I began implementing changes that honoured Richard's legacy while moving the company forward. The foundation work expanded to include educational scholarships for employees' children and community development in areas where we operated factories. Internally, I established an ethics committee with real authority to review major business decisions. Transparency became our new operating principle, rebuilding trust with employees, clients, and shareholders who had grown wary under James's leadership. The divorce finalized 6 months after Richard's death, with James receiving far less than the generous settlement he had initially offered me. With his drug use documented and his professional misconduct exposed, his negotiating position had evaporated entirely. On the day the final papers were signed, I felt a complex mixture of grief and liberation. 20 years of my life had been invested in a relationship that had ultimately failed, yet I was emerging stronger with a clear purpose and the resources to fulfill it. My healing journey wasn't linear. There were days when the betrayal still cut deep, when memories of happier times would ambush me in quiet moments. I found support in unexpected places, building genuine friendships with colleagues who appreciated my leadership style and values. I established a support group for women navigating major life transitions, finding that sharing my experience helped others while simultaneously healing my own wounds. The vulnerability I had once seen as weakness became a source of strength and connection. 1 year after Richard's death, I established the Richard Anderson Integrity in Business Fellowship, providing mentorship and funding for entrepreneurs committed to ethical business practices. The first cohort included a single mother developing sustainable manufacturing processes whose determination reminded me of my younger self. In honouring Richard's legacy, I found my own path forward. The company thrived under leadership that valued long-term sustainability over short-term profits. Employee satisfaction reached record levels, and our reputation for ethical business practices attracted partners who shared our values. As for James, I heard he eventually found work at a much smaller firm, his reputation in the industry permanently damaged by the revelations that emerged during our divorce. The last time I saw him was at a charity event 2 years after our separation, where he appeared diminished. Somehow the confident swagger replaced by a careful humility that seemed foreign on him. 3 years after my divorce, I met David, a widowed professor whose genuine kindness and intellectual curiosity gradually broke through the walls I had built around my heart. Our relationship developed slowly, built on friendship and mutual respect, rather than the whirlwind passion that had characterized my early days with James. "You've been through so much," David observed one evening as I shared more of my story, "yet you've emerged with such grace and purpose." "Not always with grace," I admitted with a small smile. "There were plenty of broken dishes and tears along the way." "That's not what I mean," he clarified. "Anyone would feel anger and pain. Grace is continuing to lead with compassion despite what was done to you." His observation made me reflect on the journey I had travelled. The girl from the small town who had once been dazzled by James's world had become a woman who recognised that true value lies not in wealth or status, but in character and integrity. Richard had understood this fundamental truth, and in his final act had ensured that the company he built would be guided by someone who shared that understanding. His faith in me had become the foundation upon which I rebuilt my life. The greatest lesson from my 20-year marriage and its painful ending wasn't about betrayal or revenge, but about discernment. Real loyalty isn't proven during easy times, but revealed during challenges. Character isn't something you possess by birthright, but demonstrate through consistent actions, and sometimes losing what you thought you wanted creates space for what you truly need. I often wonder what you would do if faced with betrayal after investing years in a relationship. Would you seek revenge, or like me, focus on rebuilding something meaningful from the ashes? Have you ever experienced someone underestimating you, only to find strength you didn't know you had? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more journeys of resilience and renewal. Remember, sometimes the end of one chapter is just the beginning of a far better story.